What other kinds of challenges have you faced in the design of Scratch, either in terms of the community or in terms of the sets of blocks or ways you have kids interact with the software?
As the community has grown, it has changed a little bit from, it started as like a small town where everyone knew each other, and now it's more like a big city. So people can feel a little bit anonymous there. So one thing we've needed to think about is how we can help people feel more supported, to help them know how to meet other people, and to try to think how can we have smaller sub-communities within the large community. Another thing that we have to think about is to make sure that the different sub-communities within this large community, how they relate to each other. Because sometimes different people come to Scratch for different reasons, and we want to make sure that they all respect one another. So for example, there's some people who come to focused on making games. They make very sophisticated games, and a lot of times those are the best and most sophisticated programmers. And there are others who come who are more into animation and storytelling, and sometimes they'll get started just by making these beautiful images, but with very simple programs. Sometimes there's a challenge because some of the more sophisticated programmers will ridicule or look down upon the simple programs of beginners or people who have done sort of the beautiful animations. And we want to make sure that everyone is respected for their own pathways into Scratch and for the experiences that they bring into Scratch. So we think a lot about what's going to get highlighted on the homepage to make sure it's not dominated by one subcommunity or another, and to make sure that everyone sort of appreciates and recognizes the value of what different people bring to the community.
Yeah, I feel like kind of related to your note about like these different sub-communities and how can you find what you're interested in. As it's grown, it's easy to kind of feel lost in the size of the community. And one thing we've thought a lot about is how can we help make visible the different trajectories that you can take, that there isn't just kind of one pathway through Scratch, or that there are pathways through Scratch. And one way we've been exploring that is thinking about how can we create roles in the community. Right now we're leveraging kind of the helping energy and thinking about how can we create different helper roles as a way to kind of create entry points and pathways, but also really make visible the different ways you can participate in Scratch.
So like after we start with Scratch, we introduced some new roles. Like on the homepage, we started out where we on the Scratch team would feature some projects that we thought were interesting. But then someone suggested that why don't we have one member of the community, be a curator, and they'll be selected for 2 weeks. They'll have a role on the homepage that they do. So that's one of the ways, one of the roles that a member of the community can play. They could be a curator for a couple of weeks, and they can't show off their own projects, but they show other projects that they think others in the community would like.
How do you sort of address that sort of concern that people have around, oh well, they're just going to be socializing and not doing the work that I want them to do if I'm thinking about this in a classroom situation?
I usually will start by talking about that we do see the social side as an important part of the learning process, and trying to help people understand the value of the social interaction on the site, that how people both get ideas and are inspired by other things that are there, but also they get feedback from other people. So I want to make sure that people recognize the social side of it. On the other hand, I also can understand if it's only social interaction and no creating. We want Scratch to be about both creating and sharing and collaborating. So we do want to make sure that the creating side stays strong as well. So we try to make sure that we continue to support the creating side so it's easy for people to get started creating, and they can do things they really care about while they're creating.
We once did this kind of analysis of like what's kind of one of the first few things that Scratchers do in the community, and we really found that sharing projects was one of the prime kind of entry points into the community, and also kind of an understanding the social aspects of it. One thing that we've tried to do is create different ways that kind of combine the social and the creative aspect of it. Like one thing that we have in the homepage is this design studio. So it's a way for us to kind of introduce a theme, a creative thing that people might create projects around, and we collect them into studios, and they also get an audience for their work as they do that, and they can get feedback and whatnot. So I think it's also just trying to show that in the community as well.
I think another issue we sometimes deal with is people say, well, why so much emphasis on the community and the social side? People sometimes also say, why so much emphasis on the media and the personalization where people can record their own voice, put images? But over time, we've seen that kids become more engaged in the programming when they're programming something that they really care about. So we've seen it's really important to have the media side that kids will get more engaged in it when it's a personal exploration that they're doing, and then that they personally created, whether it's grabbing a photograph or drawing an image.
One thing that I've noticed too, in that when we ask Scratchers about their earlier experiences, and this is again like around my excitement about the community aspect of Scratch, is that when they first share their project, that someone left a comment or someone left them constructive feedback about like, oh, have you thought about doing it this way? And that kind of creates new avenues for them to explore. People can explore the site and see things that they're excited about, and then they end up kind of remixing it on their own, and it kind of takes them to that next step.
Yeah, this whole phenomenon of remixing is something that is even bigger than I'd imagined when we first started Scratch. Now I think it's about 30% of all the projects on the Scratch website are remixes of other projects. So people are building on each other's work. And that's one of the ways we really do see ideas spreading through the community. That someone sees a project and they make their variation of it is a way for them to start to play with the idea. And I think we really want to encourage more of that. But a lot of times just the blank screen is a hard place to start. So I think we've developed like starter projects that's a simple project that's looking to be remixed. So that's something else we've tried to do more of, to see how can we give the raw materials to make it easier for people to start with that and then remix on their own. But it's also, as Scratchers remix one another's projects, they also are learning about what it's like to be part of a community and the right ways of interacting with others. Because sometimes people do get upset when someone else remixes their project and they say, they took my idea, they stole my idea. And we often will then, it leads to a conversation online, say, actually in Scratch, we encourage people to build on each other's projects, but you need to give credit and acknowledgement. In fact, one of the graduate students in the group, Andres Monroe Hernandez, who developed the initial Scratch website, he did his whole dissertation on remixing. And part of it was studying how ideas spread through the community, but it was also about how people learn the rules of being part of a community in new ways, and how they start to think about their role in the community in new ways, because of remixing in Scratch.
I encountered a project the other day that said like, only remix this if you have a good idea or something like that. And so how do you sort of cultivate that sense of community in the way of participating in it and the rules around it? Because it's not I can't just go read the FAQ rules. Yeah. It's more implicit than that.
So some of it is through the conversations around it, but we try to do some of this in the design of the site. When Andres was starting to look at remixing and he saw some of the ways that people got upset if their projects were remixed, he suggested adding a row on the homepage that was the projects that were most remixed. And that was a way of turning it around for people to get a sense of pride. If their project was most remixed, it would be featured on the homepage. So rather than being something you should be upset about, it should be a source of pride if others are remixing your project. Of course, there are always unintended side consequences whenever you make design changes, because then a lot of times people would then start making projects specifically just to be remixed. And it led to different types of projects, some of which are very interesting projects, but sometimes not the best projects. So it's a continually evolving ecosystem.
And one thing that we also added from the design side of things is a remix visualization, a remix tree visualization. And it was a way for people to kind of see how a project evolved over time. And it's really beautiful sometimes. Sometimes it's as simple as like there's one project and there's a ring of projects around it. But sometimes you could see all these different pathways that a project took. And recently we made some changes so you could also see like how many loves some of the remixes got over time. And you can dig in to that, and so it's a way to show the community of like how does a project change through remixing.
Another design change we made with the most recent version of Scratch was that on the website there used to just be one place for project notes. So you would do a project, and there was a place to describe your project, and people would put instructions there about how to use the project, maybe a little history of how they came up with the idea, and they might give credit there as well if it was remixing or if they got ideas from someone else. In the new version of Scratch, we separated that into two separate fields, one for notes, like instructions, but one explicitly for credit and acknowledgement. So we sort of gave it its own space to highlight that we see this as important. And we even, and this is the type of discussion we continue to have about design, is that right now, if you don't fill in anything there after remixing, it will keep pushing you to say, you haven't filled this in yet. And we're never quite sure. We don't like pushing people too much. On the other hand, we do want to put a high value to that.
It's been interesting too to also see how scratchers have also kind of taken on this value and try to encourage their peers to also leave credit. Sometimes it's taken a little extreme and like they've created groups where there's one group called the Copycat Cops. And they went around and kind of like encourage, they found people who were copies and like, oh, you just copied, and they would report it to us. But I mean, I think also generally scratchers have also kind of taken up this value and encouraged their other scratchers to do it as well.